EV ranges can be very confusing. So this is a video on EV ranges, and this is the grumpy old man. When you first start looking for an EV, you'll notice that some of the stated ranges that you can drive on a charge. The problem with these is the standards that they are using to get those figures. Let's take a couple of minutes to look at what they all are. The first one is NEDC, and this stands for New European Driving Cycle. In the EV world, it's taken to mean not even damn close, as you'll see in a little while. The next standard, which replaced that one, is WLTP, which stands for Worldwide Harmonized Light Vehicle Test Procedure, or I prefer, what? Less than promised? Lastly, there's the EPA standard, which is a USA standard developed by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and it's probably the closest estimate of true driving range, as it actually uses a multi-cycle city highway testing procedure. So essentially all these results, in simple terms, are about bragging rights. You know, my car will do 600 kilometers. It's usually pretty rubbish. NEDC is the worst, WLTP is the second worst, and EPA is only slightly overestimating what you can do. So with all these ranges of vehicles, it's a relatively new phenomenon. Previously, you would get quoted miles per gallon or litres per 100k. And from that, if you knew the capacity of the tank in the vehicle, you could deduce how far you could travel. But I bet that very few people actually did that. They just looked at the figures of 6 litres per 100k or 30 miles per gallon and go, oh, that's all right. But I can tell you from experience that those figures were nowhere near the truth, as I'm sure you may well know yourself, because you really got close to those quoted figures. So let me just give you a couple of examples here. We used to own a BMW 3 Series, and that is currently quoted, as you'll see here, 6.3 litres per 100k. Well, my wife used to drive that, and she was a very frugal driver, hardly ever go crazy with the accelerator, and we only ever got 7 to 7.5 litres per 100k out of that. So that was obviously a little bit out. And then I had a BMW X5 30D, and as you can see here, this is quoted as 7.2 litres per 100k. Now, I'm not quite as frugal a driver as my wife, and I was getting much closer to 10 litres per 100k. So obviously nowhere near what they were expecting. And I also had a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, which I drove 77% of the time on its battery. It was quoted as 1.7 litres per 100k, and despite the fact that I was driving 77% of the time on its battery, I only got 3.1, so not exactly close to predicted. So this exaggeration of the abilities of vehicles is not new, but because with electric vehicles they're quoting ranges rather than miles per gallon, or not even kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers or watt hours per kilometer, it's easily confusing people saying, oh, our car will do 600 or 500 kilometers. It will never get that, and I'll explain why in a little while. So let's get back to the EV driving ranges. So as I've said, NEDC is a very slack form of testing, and it involves basically urban driving. For ICE vehicles, or internal combustion engine vehicles, it was last updated in 1997 and it's still in use today. It's well recognised to give unachievable results. But because of that, manufacturers can boast about their range. And some countries, such as China, they're still using it as their main fuel consumption protocol. If you convert NEDC into real-world range, then take about a third off those figures. So if you see an EV with a capable range of 600 kilometers NEDC, it's more likely to have a real-world range closer to 400. This, as I said, was replaced with the WLTP standard, but even that overestimates the vehicle range. These were all brought in to test ICE vehicles for their CO2 emissions, as targets were being introduced and slowly decreased to improve the air quality, global warming, and so on. So if you see a quoted range in WLTP, deduct about 20 to 25%. So a WLTP EV range of 600 kilometers in the real world is closer to 450 kilometers. And then lastly, we come to the EPA range estimates. This is probably the closest to real world range, but it still overestimates the range by about 10%. So a quoted range of 600 kilometers EPA range is more likely 540 to 550 kilometers in the real world, but it's better than all the others. So what can we take away from all this? Well, basically, what you will get in range is almost certainly less than the quoted figures, but you have to remember that range is affected by a whole host of different things. All these tests are carried out on a dynamometer indoors with no wind and controlled conditions. So real-world driving, outdoors, variations in temperature, wind, road surface, rain, etc. can all lower the range unless the wind's behind you, in which case it will improve it slightly. All that I've covered so far is for a battery going from a 100% down to 0%. Unfortunately, batteries don't like this to happen to them very often. The newer LFP batteries, which is lithium iron phosphate, don't mind going up to 100% all the time, but you shouldn't take them down to 0% very often because you will screw the battery. You're better off running your EV between 20 and 90%, which, if you look at it, you're only getting 70% of your battery capacity. So if you calculate your car can travel 400 kilometers, 70% of that is 280 kilometers. And so 280 to 300 kilometers is more like the real world driving range of your EV. Yeah, it all sounds like it's just getting worse and worse. And so why would I buy an EV? Or if you've already got one, have I got a lemon? EVs are completely different to owning an internal combustion vehicle. Most people on average will do approximately 40 kilometers a day. So 5 days of the week, 200 kilometers. If you've got a range of 300 kilometers in your EV, you're fine. You don't have to charge it up all that often. However, if you've got an internal combustion engine, you can't fill it up at home. You've got to go out and find a garage. With an EV, you can charge it up all the time at home. So when you get home, you just plug it in, and when you get up in the morning, you've got a full tank. 95% of EV users do this. And if you've got a special plan from your electricity supplier, it's even a lot cheaper at night. So my plan gives me a 33% discount for power used between 11 PM and 4 AM. So I can charge my EV at home very cheaply. And I'll be talking about charging in another video, how to charge, when to charge, and so on. So please keep an eye out for that. So subscribing, that would be good, as well as liking this video and hitting the bell notification icon so you get notified. So as a last item, there's a very good website that gives real world ranges for a lot of EVs. And this is the EV database, and it's at ev-database.org. So here we are on the EV database. And if we're taking a look here at the Model 3 and Model 3 variants, you will see that on the Tesla website in Australia anyway, they quote the WLTP range. So if we look at the standard range Model 3, here we go, standard range Model 3. It's on the website for Tesla. It says it's got a WLTP range of 491 kilometers. So I've said take 25% off that, gives it a real world range of approximately 370 kilometers. Now this database here says 380 real world range. So that's pretty close. Now this is for the new Model 3, which has got the lower acceleration and the larger battery. The long range is quoted as 614 kilometers WLTP, or according to me, that works out at about 460, but the database here is registering about 455 to 490. It depends upon the size of the battery when you bought it and so on. And it's a similar story for the performance. The website says 567. The EV database has it at 470. By my calculations, 567 comes down to closer to 425. Now we'll just take a look at, say, the Hyundai. So here we have Hyundai Australia's website, and as you can see, the new Ioniq 5 is quoting 430 to 451. So real world, that's probably below 400. And so here we have the Hyundai Australia website, and it's quoting 430 to 451 kilometers. That little asterisk, if you scroll down, it's very tiny writing. It says it's based on the WLTP range. So 450 brings it down more like 350. So very close to a standard range Model 3 Tesla. But you've got to realize that a lot of things affect the range. If you're driving headlong into a raging gale, you're not going to get as far. EVs have actually driven around Australia, so honestly, range is not really a problem. You need to change your way of thinking from ICE mode to EV mode, and then you'll be fine. So you don't get too disheartened by all of this. Just ask yourself, how far do I normally travel each day? How often do I need to travel more than 300 kilometers? With the chargers that are around, life is actually not that hard. From where I live, I can easily drive 600 kilometers in any direction, and I've driven south and north, and it requires one stop in my Model 3 standard range. I actually need 2 stops because my EV range exceeds my bladder range by about 100 kilometers. But each to their own. You'll find out just how far you can actually go, and where there's a nice charger that will get you on your way quite quickly. You'd have to stop for petrol or diesel, and all those horrible fumes. So stopping to plug it in, go off and have a toilet break, have a coffee or a snack. If you time it right, you're at morning coffee or lunchtime or afternoon tea, and you'll be fine. So range, don't look at the expected range and think you're going to get it. Take it down a little bit, and then you won't be disappointed, and you'll be able to plan your trips very well. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll be coming out with a charging video sometime in the near future. Thank you.